Hey there, folks. Welcome to today's episode of the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. My guest today is Steve Dennis, who is the president and founder at Sageberry Consulting. Previous to that, he spent over 12 years at Sears Holding Co. or Sears Roebuck, if you were there at that time, and also was an SVP at Neiman Marcus Group. He is the author of two books. Steve, how are you today?
I'm great. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
I'm excited to chat. I know you host your own podcast as well, so you're no stranger to the podcast medium. But maybe you can tell our listeners a little bit about who you are, what's the kind of stuff you talk about, and what kind of stuff you want to bring to our audience today.
Sure. Well, I've spent most of my time, as you mentioned, on the retail side. First part of my career on the management side, working myself up to the senior leadership teams, Sears back in the 90s and at Neiman Marcus, as you mentioned, more recently. The last 15 years or so, I've been out on my own doing strategy consulting. I'm on several boards, writing, speaking. Really the through line, though it's shifted a little bit for me in the last few years, but the through line for most of my career has been working on the most interesting strategy and growth issues, whether that was when I was on the management side or whether it's working with clients. More recently, it's kind of shifted to broader kind of transformational leadership, digital disruption kinds of things. But, I like working on interesting problems and hopefully helping organizations reach their full potential.
Awesome. I love that. Well, that's what our podcast is about. So if we're aiming, our mission is to become the number one management podcast in the world, and management doesn't discriminate against industries. And for those of you listening, you might not know that we have about 25,000 people a month visit our website for information on strategy. And I get to see every one of you that fill out a form, whether it's the Krogers of the world or technology companies or what have it. So everybody's facing challenges about the changing both world of work, the world of leadership, and the world of running a business. And so, Steve, given the fact that you have such a deep expertise and background in retail, and what are you seeing from the transformation of the world of retail from bricks and mortar to digital, or do you consider it something totally different?
Well, there's no question that over the past, I guess, really almost 30 years now, the biggest story in retail and probably in business more broadly has been the effect of digital technology. First, just the invention, the invention of the internet, and then transactional e-commerce, and then smart devices, and then, cloud computing. So, we've seen waves of technology really both challenge incumbents as well as give rise to totally new business models. Obviously, we're super familiar with Amazon and Google and all these companies that emerged in the 90s, but even quite a lot of new models in the last 10 years or so. So that's made it very challenging for retailers that haven't kept pace for whatever reason, whether they didn't appreciate the degree of change, whether they got caught up in their own leadership challenges or borrowed too much money. There are a lot of different reasons why folks don't transform at the speed they need to. One of the things that I keep coming back to, because I've been asked recently, particularly with this new book coming out, but just in general, because there's been so much news about companies like Macy's that have been around forever, but struggle and come up with a new strategy, it seems every few years that doesn't work. I keep coming back to this question because it's obvious, I think, that the world has changed a lot, right? Like, there's probably nobody listening to this that doesn't appreciate that the world today, business world, is really different than it was even 5 years ago, but certainly 20 years ago. I keep coming back to this question, which is, if the world has changed so much, why have you changed so little? And that's been an exploration point for me when I worked on the industry side more directly on senior leadership teams. I tended to approach the challenges we were having with what I would say was a more kind of left brain logical way of approaching things. Like, if here's a problem, I'm going to do all the analysis and build this really persuasive audience or persuasive argument to try to get, my boss or the leadership team to move in the direction that I thought we should take. But, what I've started to appreciate more and more over time is, there are other characteristics, more human qualities, I guess you could say, conditions of us as humans, like how our ego gets in the way or how fear keeps us stuck. Like, there's more reasons than just not having done the consumer research or not having done the competitive analysis or not realizing that you're in trouble. Because clearly companies that have really watched the last 20 years or so happen to them, most of them were pretty aware that they were in trouble. I can tell you when I was at Sears and my last job there was head of corporate strategy in 2003, so quite a long while ago now, we were very aware of the struggles we faced, and we were very aware of what the underlying causes were. It's just that for various reasons, we didn't do much about it.
Yeah. Well, for some of those businesses, Kodak and many others,
Mhm.
the fear is that that change will cannibalize the existing business.
Exactly.
So it's
Yeah.
more of like a fear of what might happen. And it's been said by someone wiser than me that leaders leap. So
Mhm.
regardless of what that is, like moving that forward. So you just wrote your new book, Leaders Leap.
Yep.
Tell me about how the background of your experience and the fact that you can see a train coming and you get frozen in fear, how does that translate to kind of best practices that you have seen, either done or not done, that have inspired your most recent book?
Well, the impetus was really, some of what I was talking about was having first spent more of my time on kind of what's new and what's next, but then starting to work at companies that were struggling to varying degrees. Sears, obviously, Neiman's, not so obviously, though some things have caught up with them in the last decade or so. But working with clients and seeing where they struggle. And again, I kind of said in most cases, it wasn't a problem of having an idea of what to do. Like it wasn't so much a strategy issue, like, oh, you're just looking at this problem the wrong way. And it turns out, some of the statistics that I quote in the book, about 70% of all transformations fail, according to McKinsey. And then Alex Partners has done this disruption study every year. And it basically, I won't go through all the numbers, but basically points out that more and more CEOs and other leaders are, know they need to change. They're very worried about, even what to start working on, that it can be very overwhelming. So I started to ask the question, well, okay, if it's not so much a matter of strategy, and there's plenty of books on, there's Blue Ocean Strategy and Good to Great, and, there's lots of folks that have covered the strategic territory here. Are there other reasons why leaders struggle to make the changes that in most cases they know they should? I'm not saying that sometimes they're not confused or have a bad strategy, but in most cases they know what to do, but they're slow to do it. And I would say, I just wrote a piece for Harvard Business Review, which is really around one of the concepts in the book, which is that safe is risky. And what I mean by that is, when we often just default to, like you say, either protecting the status quo, being worried about cannibalization, or even if we're not as worried about that, largely engaging in incremental improvement, um, we often just get passed by. We fall so far behind that we can't catch up. So this idea of leaping is really twofold. One is if the world is moving very fast and new technology, new competitors, new consumer trends are causing you to have to aim higher in the degree of value and differentiation you provide, then it's going to take more of a leap than just a series of slow steps or little jumps, right? So, but there's also a mindset. The core of the book is really more around these mindset shifts, or what I call mind leaps, that leaders have to make to be able to see what they need to do and hopefully get at it with greater success.
Yeah, and I would only imagine that, the culture within the organization, because if you have one or two people that see the problem and everybody else has, hubris that nothing moves. And so, what I was thinking about as you were saying that idea of like, hey, we need to burn the boats so that
Mm-hmm.
there's no going back. Like going to that, like safe is risky, the idea of like slow death, by
Right.
a thousand cuts. And
Mm-hmm.
then as you were sharing, like talking about like transformation, it's used so frequently now.
Right.
In principle, transformation should be creating a new thing, but I think people are viewing it as well, they're calling it transformational change, so it's not new, it's changing. And so the wonder I have around, hey, if there's new things, do you need to destroy the old thing so that you can truly make something new versus trying to fix or
Yeah.
slightly alter? What are your perceptions on destruction to
Right.
create something new?
Well, some people are probably familiar with this idea of creative destruction, or move fast and break things. There's a lot of this stuff around the power of destruction as a means for creation, and I think that's an important idea. But one of the points I try to make in the book is, so the subtitle is transforming your company at the speed of disruption. And I think one of the things that's really important to figure out is, what does the speed of disruption look like in your situation? Because, and I hope I'm not offending any dry cleaners that are listening, but my impression of the dry cleaning business is there's not a ton of disruption going on there. So you don't necessarily need to blow up your dry cleaning business to create some, new AI enabled, I don't know. I'll say this, and then 6 months later, there'll be some new business model that'll, go public for billions of dollars. But clearly you can look at other businesses. Like if you look at the department store business, just to go back to the Macy's example, and because it's a place that I have spent a lot of time, that business has been in decline for more than 2 decades. And, there's one question, which is what's taken people so long to respond. But I wouldn't say it's a rapid pace of disruption, but the cumulative effect of very little change over 20 years has made that business, incredibly less valuable than it was years ago, and increasingly at risk of becoming, you could argue that it's pretty irrelevant right now, but the risk of an extinction event for Macy's, Kohl's, JCPenney is quite high. So, you have to look at the pace of disruption, decide how much change you need. Do you need to do more of a Hail Mary? I'm not in general a fan of that. Hopefully you do the work that you never get that desperate. But in some cases, you really do have to do more moonshot sort of stuff, because the end might be near if you don't. In other cases, you can do relatively slow and steady. But I would say for most companies, it's somewhere in between. It's not a moonshot or just a series of big bets. It's a portfolio approach, where you're reinventing your business and over time, hopefully positioning yourself for a much better future.
Yeah. And what I hear out of that is like looking at, you don't want a Hail Mary, which occurs to me as like a last ditch effort.
Yeah, it's desperation. It's out of desperation at that point.
Yeah, but versus the portfolio of innovative ideas. But I think the undertone of it is innovative incremental or innovative game changer. So if you think of a Google, where, in terms of the big bets, they would have had tens of thousands of ideas that have failed, but then they had something like Google Drive or Google Meet or whatever, Gmail, that those things, move forward. So I guess how I think about it, and if we go back to that retail context, you have imagination. Like how imaginative are the people in your organization, and how free are they to disrupt systems? You have the Sears, you have the Neiman's, you have the Macy's, again, giving that's the context. And then I think of the distinction between retail, which is like how it gets sold, and fashion needs to be like quarterly, like it needs to be fresh otherwise. So
yes.
And I'm not a fashionable person, so I don't know or get the world of fashion, but how do you look at—
I'm not making any comments about your outfit.
No, that's okay. I mean, we got the brand, that's the one we're looking for. But how do you see the importance of we'll call it imagination in business, and then going back to that, like imbuing creativity within an organization to support those new fresh ideas from a systemic perspective?
Yeah, so I would put it into two categories. I think there are the sort of the ingredient pieces, so in fashion, or, there's many industries where even you could say in CPG, we're a steady stream of product innovation, the Starbucks pumpkin latte, what's the next thing? I mean, those are not breakthrough ideas, right? But part of the nature of the business is you've got to be coming up with something new and fresh to keep your business model going. Then I think there's really more the business design innovation, where you're really talking about a very different way. So I think where we see a lot of companies, I mean, certainly there are plenty of companies that just don't have enough of a product pipeline or service pipeline to be as successful as they need to be. Where we tend to see the biggest issues are where the business design is losing gas. So the department store example would be one. But outside of retail, if you think about what Uber and Lyft and Grab and others have brought to the taxi space, or what Vrbo or Airbnb brought to the hotel space, they really approached the customer problem, or what the customer the customer job to be done, to use Clayton Christensen's language, in a different way. They weren't just looking for an incrementally, like, what I say about the taxi industry is, innovation in the traditional taxi industry is being able to take a credit card or having a little screen where you could just, it's like payment is sort of and being able to print out a receipt. Like, that was innovation in the taxi industry at the time that Uber and Lyft were totally disrupting it by using technology and thinking about the problem in a different way, because the customer wants to get from point A to point B in the most effective and efficient way. Just like, when we go on a trip, we want to stay in a place that meets our needs. It just was very cumbersome to try to do short-term rentals. So I think some of it, from if you're in an industry that is being disrupted by technology, is to ask the classic question, what business are you in? But it's really, what customer outcome are you trying to drive? And are you thinking about it too narrowly? And what I see a lot is product-driven companies that have been in kind of one space. They think about it very narrowly. So I think creatively, you want to open the aperture to think about what is the ultimate customer solution? Are there other aspects to it that could give us real unique advantage and kind of leapfrog to a different place, as opposed to what I talk about in the book? And I kind of hate to quote this guy because he's a demonstrably terrible human being, but Henry Ford, he said, if I'd asked customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. And I think we see this incremental approach in a lot of businesses. Like, that's the definition of success. I'm going to do what I'm already doing just a little bit better, but then Lyft or Airbnb or the iPhone or whatever comes along and totally changes the basis for competition and puts your existing business model at severe risk.
Yeah. And one of the things that stuck with me out of what you said, but this idea of aperture. And I was like, well, why are these businesses slow? And all of the slow businesses, air quotes, they all have like physical assets. So like, if you're in a building, you look at your building as your store. The same thing with like taxis. Like, I have all of this physical infrastructure. Therefore, right, I think I have to have a physical solution, whereas everybody that has like innovated, they had nothing, which meant that they could play with anything, so that they were creating from a blank slate versus trying to create from like, hey, how do I make this building? And then really like, hey, what is the building? Is the old experience and need for the customers going to be the same one? Before, going back to retail, it's I need to be able to procure XYZ good when I want it, assuming it's available. Now potentially more of an experience or an exclusivity or something that they can't get from alternative A, alternative B. Thoughts?
Well, one piece of advice, no, I think you're very right. One of the quotes I have in Leaders Leap is from this venture capitalist who says, why was God able to create the world in only 7 days? Because he didn't have to worry about the installed base. And this idea of, when you already have something that you're trying to protect, you said this at the outset, this fear of cannibalization, but it often puts blinders on you. Like, I've got to maximize this. And what I often advise clients is, which is a thought exercise, but I think can get you to an interesting place, is to say, start with a blank canvas. And if you had to do it all over again and to go after, something close to the opportunity, the business you're in today, how would you go about it? And, you can pull in, if you want, the assets or skills or capabilities you already have. But don't start with the premise that like, oh crap, I got all these stores and malls that are 200,000 square feet or whatever. I've got to navigate my way. And eventually you have to deal with it. But, many in retail in particular, nothing prevented any of these guys from taking a market or two and doing something very, very different. And, over time, that could have been the model that they could have run with. But because they didn't, it created space for TJ Maxx and Ulta and, a number of these other brands that have stolen market share. So you've got to really not only be open the aperture to think more broadly, but be willing to relax some of the constraints. Because, yeah, absolutely, the installed base problem or the protection of your core business problem is a big explanation for why many companies that once were famous and dominant are either no longer around at all or, really mere shells of their former selves, unfortunately.
Yeah, right. Partially comes out like that sunk cost fallacy. We've put all this money
Right.
into blank, blank, blank. As a strategic planning facilitator, that's like the hardest thing where people are like, oh, well, I want to fit this into that, and like the square peg, round hole kind of thing. And it's like
Right.
you're going to be limited by your perceived constraints and moving that forward. So I think that's really important. And then what I've seen other folks do in those type of organizations, and I believe you can do it big or small, set up a tiger team, like put
Right.
up something together with no constraints that they can be free. And then if you have nothing, you can create anything. Steve, this has been an amazing conversation. Can we just take 90 seconds? You can tell folks about your book, and then where they can
Sure.
connect with you, learn more about your podcast, learn more about all the other speaking and thought leadership you do.
Sure. Well, the best place, well, I'm very active on social media, particularly on LinkedIn is probably the easiest place to connect with me. So it's Steve Dennis, but mostly on social media, I'm at Stephen P, as in Peter, Dennis, Dennis. Leaders Leap, Transforming Your Company at the Speed of Disruption, should be available just about anywhere books are sold worldwide. So it should be easy to find as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Stephen P. Dennis. I appreciate it. Thank you for sharing. And yeah, just thanks for everything you do. I think it's really important for leaders in 2024 and beyond to truly be looking at the future, because we didn't talk about AI or technology or any other of those things, but the speed of disruption is getting faster and faster, and one's ability to move it forward is critical. So pick up the book, make the leap, do whatever you got to do. But Steve, thanks for being here today.
Thanks a lot, Anthony. I appreciate it.
Folks, my guest today, Steve Dennis, who is the president and founder of Sageberry Consulting. I didn't get a chance to talk to him about his board work, but I think what's really important for any leader in an organization is to take that 30,000-foot view so that you can not only like support the current, but build for the future. Retail, as an example, is one that's taken its knocks over the past while. I think we're going to start seeing a lot more disruption in a lot more industries. And so my invitation to you is take time out to work on your strategy, dare I say, with a strategy offsite with somebody like SME Strategy, or work with Steve's team and just help you look for the future so that you can be successful wherever you're at. Hopefully this podcast has supported you in doing that. If it has, please give us a review, share it with your friends, and give us a comment. Let us know whatever you like or didn't like, because we definitely welcome feedback. So once again, thank you, Steve. Appreciate you being here. My name is Anthony Taylor. This has been the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. I appreciate you. I hope you have a great day. See you next time.